Good morning. My name's Mary Jane Burke. We're excited to have you join us. We just jumped off of a call with Dr. Willis and Dr. Santora. Any of you that weren't unable to be part of that, please note that it will be posted by tomorrow, and those calls will be happening actually every Thursday at 9 over the next 4 weeks as we talk about the steps we need to take to reopen our schools. So welcome this morning. We're excited to have you. Today's session is specific to what does it look like when you do a site walkthrough? And what do you need to take into account in order to ensure that your school facility is ready to go as we welcome students back into our schools? One thing to keep in mind, and of the most important, is that you want to make sure you're dealing with a broad group of stakeholders so that you can get input from a variety of sources as you think about what the needs are. No one school, no two schools are the same. They're different entrances, exits, sizes, etc. So this is very, very important. So with that, you're going to have a chance this morning to hear from Patrick McLaughlin and Melina Boyd. So Patrick, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary Jane. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick McLaughlin, and I am a member of the Rethinking Schools Task Force with the Marin County Office of Education. And as Mary Jane mentioned, we will be talking about school site walkthroughs, how best to prepare our school facilities for the return of site-based classroom instruction. So our agenda today will provide a little bit of background. We will be talking about the documents that we're using when making our decisions and the guidelines that we're using in making our decisions. We'll touch briefly on the public health guided return to site-based classroom instruction that came out last week. We'll be talking a little bit about the school site specific protection plan. And then we'll do a little bit of a mock walkthrough. We went to Mary Silvera earlier this week and took some pictures. And so we'll kind of do a mock walkthrough together with all of you so that you can get a sense of our approach and the things that we're looking at. So we have completed a number of walkthroughs so far. And that includes, we've walked through preschool programs, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. We've also done some LEA offices in 8 school districts. So we've been doing this for a while, and you know, I'll tell you, every time that we do it, we learn new things. And so, you know, this is a collaborative effort. Every single site is a little bit different. And so it's been a good experience for us, and we've learned a lot during the process. So the driving documents that we are using as we're doing these walkthroughs, there's 3 main driving documents. One is through the CDC, came out in May 19th, considerations for schools. Also, the California Department of Public Health and the California Department of Education provided 2 guideline documents that came out in early June. The COVID industry guidance for schools and school-based programs, as well as the Stronger Together, a guidebook for safe reopening of California public schools. I would strongly recommend that you take a look at these documents while you're doing this work. Also, guiding documents that we are starting to use include a public health guided return to site-based classroom instruction. That was a document that was created by Marin Health and Human Services, as well as the Marin County Office of Education. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. We at MCOE have also helped create a school site specific protection plan template that can be used while doing these walkthroughs, as well as a school site walkthrough document that is useful as well in this work. So the public health guided return to site-based classroom is the guideline that came out on the 18th of June. So Dr. Matt Willis, as well as Dr. Santora, will be doing weekly town meetings focusing on this document. It has 30 guidelines that are really important to take a look at. Again, these are guidelines, meaning they're kind of the lanes, and which provide a lot of flexibility at the local level to make decisions. Again, there are 30 different guidelines, and one of those guidelines, the last one, number 30, is the school site specific protection plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as a tool as you start to do your walkthroughs. So with that, I'll hand it over to Melina Boyd, who will talk a little bit about the school site specific protection plan.
Thank you, Patrick. Hello, everyone. So all schools are going to be responsible for filling out a school site specific protection plan. This is a document that's going to help you conduct a risk assessment and get your campus ready for student and staff return. This is a 10-page fillable PDF, and it will ask you to detail your practices and protocols for things like cleaning schedules, staff trainings, EPE availability, and it will go through each of the 30 guidelines that we mentioned in the last slide. It's important to note that it's going to ask you to identify a liaison to public health and also to build an interdisciplinary task force that will focus on this work. Once you have it all filled out, you can print and display it on your main office window. Please be sure to check our website for Zoom calls in July. That's going to help you plan and implement your school site specific protection plan for the fall. Thanks.
Thank you, Melina. So when we start to think about the walkthroughs, it's really important, as Mary Jane mentioned, that we have a lot of stakeholders in that work. So we want as many folks as we can from different parts and aspects of our school and community in those walkthroughs. Everyone has a unique perspective and a unique lens in which they look at this reintroduction to class-based instruction. So it's just an example of different types of stakeholders that we would want to include in that process the best that we can. This is actually a picture of the group that was at Mary Silvera when we did the walkthrough on Monday. And so it was made up of a variety of different stakeholders, parents and union representatives, custodial team, administrative team, classroom teachers. So lots of different folks that were doing this work together. I was in a conversation with San Rafael City Schools, and they had included students as well, which was fantastic. So as many stakeholders that you can get in this process, the better. So we have created a school site or a school site walkthrough document that helps drive the thinking as you do this walkthrough. It's found on our website. And so I would strongly recommend using that document as you do the walkthrough. One of the things that we talk about in this document is looking at your facility through two main lenses. The first lens is the engineering, design, and PPE lens. So that would be kind of the physical facility itself and things that you can do on the physical property by providing resources or looking at HVAC systems. What are the hand washing facilities set up? Are there hands-free sinks? Is that something that's practicable to get within your facility if possible? Are there face coverings provided? Is there soap and water provided in all of the classroom spaces? Are there things that you can put on the floor to help encourage flow or proper physical distancing between students? So lens number one, as you're doing those walkthroughs, is really focused on the design, the engineering, and the materials that are provided for the students and the staff when they return to class-based instruction. The other lens that we encourage folks to look through is the administrative. And so what is meant by that are specific policies and protocols that are in place to encourage or to help mitigate risk when students are on site. What trainings are in place? How are students arriving to school and leaving school? how are the daily health screening systems set up? So it's really about policies, protocols, systems that are in place, scheduling, emergency plans, communication, cleaning schedules, guidelines, protocols. That's the second lens. That's the administrative lens. And both of these lenses are really designed, they're measures and controls to lower risk. So again, these engineering and these protocols, the idea behind them is to mitigate the probability of exposure and to mitigate contact time between people. And contact time is defined as within 6 feet for 10 to 15 minutes without a mask. So we want to put in measures into place and controls into place to mitigate the probability of exposure and to mitigate contact time. And that's our approach. And one of the things that you'll see here is there's a picture of a car or someone driving a car. And the reason why I put that in there is I wanted to just briefly share a comparison that we've been talking about at the Rethinking Schools Task Force. And that's the idea that there is an inherent risk to driving. However, we as a society have determined that driving is important for commerce, for travel, for a variety of reasons. And so we as a society have put in specific measures and controls to decrease risk when driving, i.e. seat belts, i.e. Speed limits, airbags, you have to be a certain age, you have to take a test, there's lines in the road. So all of these mitigation measures have been put in to decrease the risk when driving. And we compare that to the measures of putting into place in the classroom or at those schools. So making sure people have face coverings, making sure people are physically distanced apart. All of these are mitigating measures to decrease that probability of exposure. It doesn't completely eliminate all of the risk, but it lowers the risk. So we're going to do a little bit of a walkthrough together, and this was at Mary Silvera. So this is a classroom space at Mary Silvera. And so what we did when we got there, you'll see that there's a lot of the way that the desks are all set up and tables. We were analyzing that, and basically what we started doing is we started measuring it out. What does it look like? And so that is something that you would want to be doing in your classroom, is to look at the space and start to measure out how can you place those desks to ensure that physical distancing between 4 to 6 feet. And so that's the best way to just kind of start working on it. I'd say that the other piece of it is, once you've figured out how many, what the capacity of a room can be based on that physical distancing, is to remove the other items the best that you can to make sure that you have ample space in that classroom. We also looked at some other classrooms. And so I'm just going to give you a moment to look at these 3 pictures within another classroom and just come up with some of the things that you think about if you were looking at that space through the lenses that we talked about. And so I'll just jump to things that we saw when we were looking at that. One of them is this couch, and I'm sure it's a lovely space for students and staff to sit and to socialize. I think at this point, because this is more of a porous item, we would have to remove that during this time because it's just too hard to clean and or sanitize. I would say the same for all of these stuffed animals, is to really ultimately trying to remove as much clutter as possible. One, simply for the reason that it allows for a greater ease of cleaning and sanitizing. But the other piece is that these items are really, really difficult to clean and sanitize. And so removing as much clutter and porous equipment and materials and supplies as we can. You know, talking about the equipment, the sports equipment, one of the things I would want to say about it, I think that it would be helpful if each cohort had its own sports equipment that could be used out on the play field and then brought back, which would just decrease the amount of sharing between cohorts. The other piece to this is just to make sure that the location of that allows for the ease of cleaning as well. So maybe there's a better place for those items. So every single classroom is going to be a little bit different, but you know, the most important thing is to get into those spaces and to start looking around on how best to organize those spaces. You know, up here on these shelves, there's lots of books and other pieces of equipment and materials and teaching supplies. And so ideally, what we would like to do, and it's not always practicable, is that each student would have their own supplies. And again, I realize that that is not always possible. And so what we would want to do then is to decrease the amount of people that are touching those items, or to clean and sanitize those items between use of different people or different cohorts or different students as best that we can. So again, if it is possible to have separate little cubbies for each student, or to have materials for a specific student, that is preferred. Again, it's not always possible. So you're going to have to figure that out specific to your school site and the students that you serve and the population. In looking at offices and nurses stations, so again, this is Mary Silvera. This is the office space here. One of the things to really try to consider is how to decrease the amount of people that are coming into that office. If there's any strategies and measures you can put into place to decrease the amount of traffic in that space. If you have workstations, you're going to want to try to keep people 6 feet apart, facing in opposite directions whenever practicable. This right here is the nurses station at Mary Silvera, and which is a really difficult area to isolate and to work with students that are symptomatic. So what they've decided to do is they will be moving their nurses station to a classroom that's available. And so again, every single site will be a little bit different, and you'll have to make decisions at the local level. Lastly, outdoor spaces. Lots of different interesting ideas about outdoor spaces that I've heard. I know that Dr. Willis is really encouraging using outdoor spaces the best that you can to do instruction. Another idea is to try to keep cohorts to certain areas or certain play structures. So for example, maybe one cohort gets to use this play structure one day, and then the next day another group gets to use it. We would encourage some cleaning in between those uses as best as possible, and also really pushing good hand washing practices after being on these on this structure here. So really looking at your outdoor spaces and figuring out how best to use those outdoor spaces for instruction, and keeping cohorts or groups separated the best that you can. In conclusion, and we'll move to some questions in just a second, really important that you create a task force at the school level. We encourage that you include as many stakeholders as possible. Use your driving and guiding documents that I showed you. Use those guiding and driving documents in your decision making. Make sure that you are doing walkthroughs, and maybe it's not just one walkthrough, maybe it's multiple walkthroughs, and then you come back and talk, and then walk through, and then talk. And complete that school site specific protection plan as you're doing those walkthroughs. And again, the decision should be made at the district or school level using those guidelines. You know your facilities, students, families, and staff best. We have lots of resources that are on our website. We will be putting this training on the website with these documents and attachments as well. Please use that. We also have a rapid response at marinschools.org if you want to send us questions. And with that, I will open it up to some questions in the last few minutes here. Let me So, um,
Oh, sorry, Patrick.
Yeah, that's okay.
So there's a question here about, are we still mandated to take temperatures at drop off? So the plan that we provided does not mandate taking the temperatures, but I understand that Dr. Santora mentioned that on a call yesterday. So we're clarifying that at part of the statewide PPE that's being provided to all schools does include thermometers. So we'll follow up on that. Whether, I'll just say in special ed classes that we're operating, we are making sure that everyone is having their temperature taking. The next question is, at what point will we be informed about what the PPE is? Ken, are you on this call?
Yes, I am.
Can you just talk about the PPE for just a minute, where we are with that?
Sure. We received notice from the state just 2 days ago that the Marin allocation has been approved by the state agency that is coordinating this statewide. So our PPE shipment for public schools should be arriving literally within the next 3 to 5 business days. Then we will be contacting our districts to come and pick up their allocation through a plan that we've devised. Private school PPE will be coming after the public school shipment per the calendar that we've received. So we are waiting to hear more specifics on that. The PPE includes a lot. It includes up to 4 masks that are disposable per student, 4 that are cloth per student, safety shields and masks for teachers, sanitary supplies, hand sanitizers, Mary Jane said, thermometers, and other bits of PPE that all schools are going to need. The allocation is going to be done on a per student basis per the state formula, and is about a 2 months worth supply.
Patrick, are there any recommendations about keeping rugs in classrooms or not?
I think that the main recommendation is really you want to try to remove the porous materials the best that you can. You know, some classrooms have carpets, and so you're not going to be able to tear out the entire carpet. So then I would say the recommendation is just to, you know, do that routine cleaning and vacuuming as best you can. So removing those porous items the best that you can within your classroom is what I would recommend.
Patrick, there are a lot of references to that you brought up about cleaning. So who's actually doing this cleaning?
So I think it's a combination. There would be cleaning and sanitizing that would be done by teachers, and then there would be a more in-depth disinfecting that would be done by the custodial staff as frequently is how it's written, which is at least daily. If there's a way to do higher frequency, especially in those high-touched areas or in bathrooms, that would be strongly recommended.
The way that we've handled that here at the county office is we've described all hands on deck. So titles don't matter, and that we all have responsibility for our own space, high touch areas, etc., in addition to the cleaning that our custodial teams are doing. There's a question here about, what about classrooms with tables? So make the assumption there aren't a bunch of desks, as you showed in one of the pictures. How do you see, what are the strategies that some people are using if students, let's say 2 or 4 to a table?
So you would want to have the students spread out 4 to 6 feet. So maybe on the ends of those tables, and have them facing forward as best practicable. You know, there's going to be times when we're going to want students to turn and talk and have conversations. But in general, I think you want to have them spaced apart and facing towards the front of the room, not facing each other whenever possible.
And then Patrick, what about the use of the, I'm going to forget what you call them, but they're plastic, and we're getting some of those in some of our preschool programs. That
the barriers?
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about those?
Sure. I think that the way that it's recommended is that when you're finding that it's difficult to keep the 4 to 6 foot distance, that barriers are recommended to use in those situations as best practicable. I think it's also a great tool to use if you are having a one-on-one with a student and maybe doing some teaching of language, these kinds of things, that to have those barriers so you could have that one-on-one closer conversation with teachers or between students, something like that.
There's a question, sorry. Can you guys put the link back in? Several people have asked about, oh, there it is. Okay. Can somebody talk about, this might be better for Dr. Willis or Dr. Santora, but the science behind surface transmissions seems to suggest very unlikely to contact COVID by surface. How does this align with the idea of playground structures only being open to one cohort per day?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and the way that it's written in the guidelines from the that recently came out is that to clean in between uses, and cleaning is soap and water. So I think that the level of like deep disinfecting need in those outdoor play structures is not found in those guidelines. That it would be a cleaning that would be happening in between or maybe after use of just the high touch areas. And so not having to do a thorough disinfection between use.
There's a question about, do the guidelines assume students are staying in one classroom? So let's just talk elementary for that first. The students can move from one room to another, but they would be moving in a cohort fashion. So I'm a first grade class, there's 25 students. I'm gonna go to the art room and the whole class would go together, but there would be an expectation that there would be cleaning in between cohorts, use of that room in the high touch areas. At the high school level, the cohorts have more flexibility at middle and high school, and that if you could think about that, the flexibility is, imagine at the middle school level, there's 3 classes of 32 or so, that those 3 classes are able to mix up to a cohort size of 100 is the number that we're currently working on. Okay. Will the county staff be staffing schools with more custodians? I don't believe, I don't know the answer. That will be a district by district decision about whether there would be more custodians. I don't think so. I don't think there'll be additional funding, but every district can make their priority. There's a couple questions about how important it will be to clean the technology, whether it's the keyboard, Chromebooks, so we can maybe talk about that. The issue about the library, is there some specific recommendation about, Patrick, sorry, the use of different books? I know that class would be allowed to go to the library. Is there an issue related to access to the books?
So I've heard some really great ideas around books. I also know that Dr. Willis had talked about the amount of time that the virus would live on a book. And if you were to have a book on a shelf for up 3 days, that it would be okay to then have someone else grab that book without having to try to disinfect a book, which would be very difficult. So to have some sort of a system that maybe not, students are not touching every book, but there's books that are organized in a way that students can pick what they want without touching them, or someone else is showing them those books. And then to have, once those books are returned, that they go somewhere for 3 days before they're back to distribution.
Okay. All right. So we've hit a little over our time. Thank you, everybody, for participating. We appreciate it. Reminder, this session was recorded. There'll be a Q&A developed based on questions in the chat, as well as those that were asked and answered here. Reminder that the next opportunity to interact with Dr. Willis and with Dr. Santora will be next Thursday at 9 o'clock, and we'll be working through picture the 30-point plan, the first section of that plan. So, and we'll do that for the next multiple weeks. In addition, note that the team from the Rethinking Schools will be holding office hours, so opportunity for you to call in. And I believe those are, someone can tell me, Fridays at 10. Do I have that right, Patrick?
Correct. However, we will be doing it next Thursday, I believe at noon, because Friday is a holiday.
Okay, great. Thank you for doing that. All right. Thanks, everybody. Hey, Ray Mayoral, I see you there. And I heard very good feedback about the meeting you facilitated yesterday. So it's good to see you on the team. Okay, bye, everybody. Thank you.